Market gives up morning gains. Key indices near day's low. IT and financials drag while metals and healthcare lead with strong gains. Midcaps outperform.
Tata Motors rides optimism following the launch of its attractively priced Tiago electric model, which some see as a key contender for the top slot in the EV segment.
Pharma stocks make a comeback as fears over a big cut in US generic prices recede and big drug opportunities open up. Some, like Torrent Pharma, also get a boost from positive news.
Nykaa jumps after it plans a bonus issue, Gotish consumer gains after it looks to expand its Africa portfolio, and Tata Chemicals leaps as analysts eye gains from the China +1 and Europe +1 moves.
Hello and welcome to Business Lunch. I'm Nisha Podar and with me is Sonal Bootsra. Now let's begin with a look at the markets, and yes, the market nervousness really continues. Take a look at the Nifty 50 chart. No relief in sight, and it has been a downward movement for Nifty 50. When we really look at the way the other indices or other pockets are really doing, Bank Nifty is the one which is underperforming the key indices today. And when it comes to the mid-cap universe, it is showing real signs of resilience. But Nifty 50 at 16,800 odd levels is definitely a worry, not being able to defend that 17,000 levels that it has been trying yesterday as well as today. So yes, global fears as well as inflation, interest rate hike ahead of the RBI meet that is due to be slotted tomorrow. All this is really working out in the market momentum today, Sonal.
It is, of course, and also it's the monthly expiry day, so big moves that we are seeing. Nifty is down from the highs around 300 points. We have the Bank Nifty down 700 points from the day's high. So big cuts that we are seeing, definitely very volatile, and last 1 hour of trade will be very, very crucial for our own markets. But let's, of course, start with the big Q the market is awaiting. The 3-day MPC meet is currently underway with a policy decision set to be announced by the RBI tomorrow. Ritu is here to tell us what we can expect from the central bank this time around. Ritu.
Well, the Reserve Bank is expected to raise interest rates for the 4th consecutive time, and there is a wide consensus that the hike could be around 50 basis points. All the respondents to our poll said that there will be a 50 basis point hike from the MPC, arguing that there is no real reason for the RBI to opt for a token smaller move, given what we're seeing from central banks around the world. The Federal Reserve, for instance, just delivered its 3rd straight 75 basis point hike and has shown no signs of slowing down. The majority expects RBI to move swiftly and get the repo rates to 6.25% by December itself, while some are expecting rates to hover around 6%. Now, 4 out of 10 respondents said that peak repo rates could go as high as 6.5% in this cycle, while others pegged it at anywhere between 6 to 6.25%. Inflation does remain high, yes, but it is more manageable at this point. It is expected to have peaked in April, like RBI says, and while there are risks to the outlook, economists do not expect the RBI to revise its current forecast of 7.2%. However, given that inflation has stayed above RBI's tolerance limit of 6% now for 3 consecutive quarters, the MPC will have to write an explanatory letter to the government explaining the reason for its failure to contain inflation. Now, the 13.5% GDP growth we saw in the first quarter, that was below RBI's projection of 16.2%. Now, while a third of the respondents expect this growth forecast to be left unchanged at 7.2%, the majority believes it will be lowered to around 7% in this policy. Now, on the stance, there was no real clear majority. 40% expect that RBI will leave it unchanged at withdrawal of accommodation, but half expect it to be changed to neutral, with some even expecting some tinkering in the wording. Now, the banking system liquidity slipped into deficit for the first time after almost 40 months recently, and there is generally more withdrawal of cash as well from the system during the festive season. So whether it is an OMO or a VRR or something else, markets do expect RBI to take note of the deficit and address the issue in some fashion. The other thing markets will focus on is comments on the rupee, on whether there will be any measures to attract more dollar inflows. And lastly, any comments at all from the central bank on the global bond index inclusion will also be keenly watched.
All right, thanks so much, Ritu. All eyes would be on the RBI policy tomorrow on rate hike. inflation containment measures as well as also rupee, anything being done there. We also asked former RBI Governor D. Subbarao for his take on the RBI's inflation fighting strategy and the moves it was making to defend the fall in the Indian rupee. Let's listen into what he had to say.
The RBI is anyway cooling down demand, right, with their interest rate policy, okay? So their endeavor is to restrain growth in order to restrain inflation. That's happening anyway. The question is, should that be also targeted at restraining imports? Some of that will happen. But I would say that as much as they're using the interest rate to restrain demand and to slow down the economy, I should think they should also allow a depreciation of the rupee. You know, every central bank worries about what their interest rate stance is going to have on the exchange rate, particularly emerging economy central banks. No central bank, of course, admits to using the interest rate as an instrument for exchange rate defense, but all of them look at it. RBI worries about it. But in a specific answer to your question, I would say that, the decision point has not come because even for inflation management, RBI will still have to tighten. So any interest rate tightening now will be consistent with interest rate defense as well.
Okay, it's all about the central bank's action that will be taken tomorrow, and the one that has been taken in a landmark announcement. The Bank of England has stepped in to bring stability to bond markets. The central bank has pledged to buy bonds worth £65 billion. This on the back of the UK government tax cuts, which spurred a massive sell-off in markets. CNBC's Jeff Cutmore gets us up to speed on those details.
Let's focus on what the Bank of England actually told the markets overnight. The bank effectively now stepping back into the gilt market, launching a £65 billion bond buying programme in a bid to quell the turmoil that we've seen in UK financial markets. The central bank has said it will buy long-dated bonds at a rate of up to £5 billion per day for the next 13 days in order to restore, quote, orderly market conditions. That move marks a historic intervention and comes after the UK government's tax-cutting plans sparked a firestorm in Britain's bond markets and sent the pound sterling hurtling towards parity with the dollar. Well, let's have just to focus on exactly what the Finance Ministry has said about this. The Treasury basically saying the Bank of England's intervention in the bond market was needed in order to tackle, quote, significant volatility and market dysfunction. It added that any losses incurred would be fully indemnified by the government, as it promised to continue to work closely with the central bank to support its financial stability and inflation objectives. And isn't that an interesting word in that statement? Dysfunction. So in a sense, you know, the Finance Ministry pointing to the markets and saying, well, this is the market's fault. This is all about the market's dysfunction. But ultimately, were the markets doing what markets tend to do, which is point the finger at policy making that they feel is inappropriate or unacceptable given the financial circumstances of the country involved here? And we're talking about the UK. We've focused on the trade position. Clearly, the markets have decided that unfunded tax cuts at this stage are inappropriate, and the bond market punished the UK by doing what it ultimately did. We had a big move in reaction to the announcement from the Bank of England. Obviously, we saw the gilt yields fall as the market then perceived that actually this very large player, the central bank, could get involved and drive yields back down and bring some discipline back to the bond market. So here we are on the curve with the 10-year gilt back at around 4%.
All right, big move by Bank of England on buying bonds. And on this, Uday Kotak of Kotak Mahindra Bank even tweeted about the central banks of the developed world having the stomach to contain inflation. That's an interesting point to ponder over, but staying with central banks moves all over the world. Let's also hear out what ACE investor Stanley Miller had to say about the policy action from the US Federal Reserve and his views on that. Listen in.
They made a big mistake. They seem to have owned it. But it's easy to own it when employment is strong. Let's see what happens if we get a hard landing. I just hope they stick to their guns, because this stuff was terrible in the 70s. You have to slay the dragon, and the chair is right. You're probably going to have some pain.
All right, that's all the action, the commentary on the central bank's action across the globe. We'll keep getting you more of that. But for now, we'll take a short break. When we come back, more news and updates will follow on the other side. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back. Well, let's get to you some action from the courts now. It is our court corner. The Apex Court heard the WhatsApp privacy policy case earlier today. Ashmit tracked that and is here to get us up to speed with that. Hey, Ashmit.
Well, this is one key matter that was taken up by a Constitution bench, which is a bench of 5 judges or more. Today, the Supreme Court took up the matter. What's interesting is that WhatsApp on its part clarified that, look, there are different regulations in Europe. There are different regulations in India. That WhatsApp is trying to do its best to comply with regulations in both the countries and respective countries. This essentially came in response to an argument that had been made by the petitioners that as far as privacy is concerned, WhatsApp offers a higher grade of protection measures and privacy policies with respect to European customers as opposed to Indian users. And this is something that, in fact, was pointed out even by the Solicitor General. The Solicitor General clarified the position of the centre that there can be no discriminatory treatment, that there has to be uniformity, and that the highest standards of privacy need to be maintained with respect to Indian users. What's interesting is that the Supreme Court also remarked, while hearing these arguments, that it seems that WhatsApp is admitting to having differential standards, and number two, that India boasts of the largest number of users for WhatsApp. Now, these were some of the key observations and arguments that are made. In terms of the takeaways, there are two aspects to keep in mind. Number one, the Solicitor General appearing for the centre said that this issue, number one, needs to be put in abeyance for a while, needs to be deferred for a while, given that the centre is in the midst of coming out with a new data protection regime. What they're suggesting is perhaps that we can expect some forward movement on a data protection regime or a law in the winter session of the Parliament, and that is something that the Supreme Court at this point has seen it fit to defer the hearing on that count, has said that we will give time to the centre till the winter session of the Parliament to pass a law, but that if a law does not come into effect that guarantees the protection of data security, then in January of next year is when the Supreme Court will resume hearing this case and will decide the issue in finality. So waiting with a bated breath, all stakeholders as far as government's moves is concerned on a data protection regime.
That's right, Ashmit. It's a very, very important issue, and data privacy laws will be very important to watch out for. But very recently, Sonal, we have seen WhatsApp being quite aggressive in its promotion of the privacy. You must have seen while watching any of the sports or any of the important, series on television. So they have really upped their game when it comes to promoting their brand as the really privacy trusted brand when it comes to India as well, and probably can join to this particular case. But another important matter and court action on that as well. It's the 29th of September, which is also Safe Abortion Day, and the Supreme Court has passed a judgment stating that all women, whether married or unmarried, are entitled to safe and legal abortion till 24 weeks of pregnancy. Now, the Apex Court also noted that intimate partner violence was a reality, and it was possible that married women were forcefully impregnated. Now, passing the judgment, the court said that the decision to abort or carry on with pregnancies is a question of reproduction, and autonomy and treatment cannot be denied based on marital status. So another very important social issue here, and looks like from the Supreme Court's ruling that India is far ahead of the US when it comes to right to pregnancy for women.
It is. So that is all about the abortion laws. But moving on to some important national news now. Retired Lieutenant General Anil Chauhan has been named as India's next Chief of Defence Staff. His appointment comes nearly 10 months after the death of former CDS Bipin Rawat. Lieutenant General Chauhan was the Eastern Army Commanding Chief before retiring in May 2021 and has held several command staff appointments and has extensive experience in counter-insurgency operations as well.
All right, important updates coming in from Jammu and Kashmir, where two back-to-back bomb blasts have taken place in buses in Udhampur district this morning, and CNN News 18's Mufti Isla has the latest report from there.
First, the descriptions about these blasts, two blasts, back-to-back blasts taking place within 8 hours in same district of Udhampur, in fact the main town of Udhampur, one at a bus station and another one next to a petrol pump in a bus which was going to Basant Nagar, which is in fact a Mufassal village in Udhampur only. That said, two people were injured late yesterday at around 10:30 when the first blast took place. The second blast took place at around 6 a.m. Today. Luckily, no one was walking in that bus station when that explosion happened. So, as I said, two blasts in 8 hours. Now, ADG of Jammu, Mukesh Singh, has arrived on the spot, and he has not ruled out the use of sticky or magnetic bombs. Magnetic bombs are those bombs which are latched on to a vehicle of anyone, which results in massive explosion. And clearly we've seen this happening first time in Jammu in April when Prime Minister was to make a visit, and then also an attack that took place on Vaishnav Devi pilgrims, in which 4 pilgrims were killed and there were some 20 odd who got injured. Now it seems that again these sticky bomb explosions are taking place, and this comes ahead of Union Home Minister's visit to Jammu on October 4. Whether there's a connection with VVIP visits in Jammu and these sticky bombs is something which the investigators will find out. Or as of now, the Jammu and Kashmir Police, the State Investigation Agency, as also NI have reached the spot. They're collecting material from there, also looking for eyewitnesses if there are any. And then you have the bomb disposal squad, which has picked a lot of explosive material to study what kind of explosives have been used in this. All in all, a tough ask really for the investigators to find out what it could be. In Srinagar, this is Mufti Isla.
Okay, an important update coming in from Jammu and Kashmir. On that note, we'll slip into a break now. When we return, we get you the latest on the Russia-Ukraine war from our man on the ground in Bucha, Ukraine. Stay tuned for more.
Welcome back. You're watching Business Lunch, and a quick look at the markets, and there's no relief in sight. In fact, the market is losing more ground at the moment as we speak. In fact, 62 points down on Nifty 50, 16,794 levels, 16,800 level has also been broken downwards. Bank Nifty is the one which is underperforming the key indices. Midcaps also getting comfortably in the red. They were holding on in the green. But one particular pocket which was holding in the green and still continues and was the brightest spot was the pharma healthcare space. That is also seeing some sell-off from the top. So none of the pockets are really remaining. Of course, FMCG is the best pocket in the market. So keep an eye out on Cipla, Divi's Lab, Sun Pharma and the likes. Now on to the latest coming in on some of the international development. The Russia-Ukraine war and the conflict rages on even as Moscow is poised to annex Russian-occupied regions. after referendums denounced by the West. Now, recently, the United Nations has really concluded that Russia committed war crimes in Ukraine, including bombings of civilian areas, torture and horrific sexual violence. In fact, CNBC's Sanjay Suri sent us this report from Bucha in Ukraine.
There are some names that become names of horrors beyond belief, beyond comprehension. We just can't understand how anyone could do that to anyone, how people could do that to people. Auschwitz. And horrors are not always about scale. One is one too many. In Ukraine, that name that's become the name of horror is this little town Bucha on the outskirts of Kiev. A small, leafy little suburb, typical of Europe, with thatched houses and tiled roofs here and there, a few building blocks, people living around one another, a quiet life. This became the object of a Russian attack to begin with. Houses were bombed, burnt out. 6 months on, many of them remain burnt out. They haven't been repaired. People either don't have the heart to do it or they don't have the money to do it. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was uncovered when Russian forces left on the 1st of April. Some facts about Bucha are now incontrovertible after all those allegations and those early reports that we all struggled to believe. A United Nations inquiry is underway and it has updated its findings only last week.
That is a heartbreaking ground reality from Bucha that is brought to you by our colleague there. Moving on to some more international news, Hurricane Ian makes landfall in Florida, battering the American southwest coast. The storm caused flooding and over 1 million power outages in Florida, while Cuba struggled to restore power after the hurricane wreaked havoc in large parts of the island. The U.S. southwest coastline saw winds of over 150 miles an hour before the storm weakened to a Category 3 hurricane.
And let's wind up the show with an important update coming in. Akash Ambani, chairman of Jio, has been named as the Time 100 Next. That is the Times list of the world's rising stars. Now, Akash Ambani is the only Indian to feature in the list, which highlights, remember, 100 emerging leaders who are shaping the future of business, entertainment, sports, politics, health, science, activism, and more.
You, of course, that will be on your screen. With that, we'll take your leave on this edition of Business Lunch. Stay tuned. Midcap Radar comes up next.